Good morning. How do you follow Bill Federer? Are we on? We're on. In addition to general consulting, we also do executive searches. And we're always looking to help schools grow stronger by placing strong leadership. So let me know if you're interested in leading somewhere else than where you are. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? How do I know what I think until I see what I say? Quotation from the novelist E.M. Forster. We've come together to examine the task of teaching students how to think, not what to think. And my challenge is to address you from the vantage of a teacher who is also an author and perhaps even a literary critic. While my credentials show that I have had more than 40 books published and critical bylines in places like the New York Times Book Review and other publications, I'm thinking of one called Dismissing God. I am not in favor of dismissing God. But the book is about 24 authors who had a religious, if not indeed a godly upbringing, and turned from it to dismiss God. I'm thinking of one very local, a young man born in Oak Park, Illinois, in about 1899. His father was Sunday school superintendent at Oak Park Presbyterian Church. He had perfect attendance and the pins to show it down his jacket for more than a dozen years. Then his father had the bad manners to commit suicide, and it affected the young man whose name was Ernest Hemingway. I prefer, however, this morning not to present myself as a published author, but rather as a teacher of English in the classroom. And so I do, having had that experience since 1956. And I want to offer you some basic premises and then some examples for interactive discussion and actually some writing yourselves. And I think you have a page that outlines the program, I believe. I begin by affirming the stated purposes of Turning Point Academy, dedicated to reclaiming the education of our children, reviving virtuous education focused on truth, goodness, and beauty, and restoring God as the foundation of education. We've already been well informed in the previous hour as to what the implications of not having God as part of our education. Now I begin with a few pedagogical premises, which you might consider as my non-negotiable terms if you and I were discussing your employment in my school. First and foremost, the teacher herself, himself, must know how to think as a human being about the subject matter to be taught to other human beings, persons unique in all creation because we are created in the image of God. And this premise carries with it ineradicable ethical and moral implications. As we all know, there's a growing trend among psychometricians, artificial intelligence advocates, and other secularist robots to diminish the human being by elevating cybernetic intelligence or even climate madness to equal or higher standing with human beings. Every teacher of every subject must be able and willing to confront these heresies by asking, among other questions, where is the ethical factor or the moral judgment in the mechanical response of an AI solution? Why do human beings generate and compose art and communication by means of words? Why does this art or science matter to me emotionally as a human being? Furthermore, the lesson being taught in the classroom today, its place in the curriculum, and in the subject matter as a whole, must provide evidence of the world and life view that represents both the teacher's moral and ethical perspective, shared by colleagues as the school's worldview. This is impossible in a state-funded public school, where no single worldview may have priority, and especially any worldview that hints at the fundamentals of a Judeo-Christian theology, because all other worldviews must also be regarded as equally valid, and so there can be no favor given to any. This is the principle separating independent private schooling from American public schooling since the days of Horace Mann and his 1848 declaration that the Massachusetts Common School must deliberately avoid any form of religious indoctrination. Not so at the Turning Point Academy I envision. I'm not promoting mere institutional conformity for purposes of brainwashing, but an institutional unity for the sake of avoiding philosophical and theological confusion while taking into account conflicting worldviews. In the preparation and delivery of a lesson, the teacher must possess a sense of the relationship in general between the preferred worldview and the whole discipline, the art or the science, and in particular, this immediate class time's intended lesson as an integral part of the whole. In short, the teacher needs a perspective that identifies how the several pieces of the jigsaw puzzle fit together, or the pearls on the broken strand that have fallen and rolled all over the floor. How can they be regathered and restrung? To achieve this self-awareness, the wise and experienced teacher will learn to apply the maxim of the novelist E.M. Forster. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? It's a call for self-awareness and conscious self-editing. The master key to knowing oneself is the discipline of the written word. Attempting by hand or by keyboard to put down on paper or on the computer screen a coherent expression of one's inner and otherwise swirling thoughts, imprecise ideas, strained arguments, tentative conclusions, self-contradictions. Everything we call reason or rationality improves in clarity as it proceeds from the brain to the mouth, to the fingertips, followed by the editorial process of revising and rewriting until we are satisfied that our written text is a concrete expression of what we claim to think, to know, to believe. Ernest Hemingway rewrote The Old Man and the Sea more than 30 times. At whatever grade level, from kindergarten through postdoctoral studies, It is also essential that the teacher profess and demonstrate sufficient wisdom and knowledge and understanding to be worthy of instructing others. It helps to know what you're teaching. But I believe that we must also be active practitioners of the art or science being taught. And my unhappy observation is that among all teachers in K through 12 schooling, teachers of English, by which I mean those whose primary curriculum is reading and writing, are by far the least familiar with the practice of their art. Most botanists keep a garden. Mathematicians actually balance their checkbooks. Musicians sing or play in a local choir or orchestra. Historians belong to the local historical society. But far too often, we English teachers are so wearied by rereading the same books to be taught again next year that the only writing we do is signing greeting cards. If you are an exception, congratulations and keep it up. Let's move on to the act of teaching itself. Whether today's English class consists of the study of a work of literature, reading, or the act of writing by students, composition, one of the primary lessons to be taught concerns a rhetorical device called the speaking voice, the persona, adopted by the poet, novelist, playwright, or student writer. The poet Robert Frost observed, "Every poem is dramatic. Someone is speaking to somebody else." In some forms of publication, of course, the author and the speaker are one and the same. A named newspaper columnist or op-ed contributor or writer of a letter to the editor speaks for herself or himself by name. But a front page journalist or sports reporter is presumably speaking as an observant citizen to other citizens, or as a rabid sports fan to other sports fans. Not so in the art of literature. Whether the class is reading one of Frost's poems, such as Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, or a story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart, or a novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, the author and the speaker are not identical necessarily. And so the teacher's early questions will be, who's the speaker? Whom is the speaker addressing? What's the audience? What is the speaker's tone toward that intended audience? And what is the speaker's attitude toward the subject at hand? And as with all such pieces of literature and their study, one more question. What specific words in the text reveal your responses? Let me illustrate. Here's the opening paragraph of a novel we've all read. Who is the speaker? To whom is he speaking? And what's the topic or subject? You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another. Without it was Aunt Polly, or the widow, or maybe Mary. And Aunt Polly's Tom's Aunt Polly, she is. And Mary and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book, with some stretchers, as I said before. Who's speaking? Oh, you don't know that, do you? No? If you read the cover, yeah. But if you just read this paragraph, he doesn't have a name. Okay. What can you tell me about him, this speaker?
Got a southern accent.
Well, he's from a certain region of the country, yeah. Yeah, he's backwoodsy, yeah. Mm-hmm. What else?
Of those around him.
Once again?
He's observant of those around him.
Indeed, he's observant of those around him. What else?
He's not Mark Twain, and he's slightly denouncing his accuracy.
He's not Mark Twain, and Mark Twain doesn't exist, does he?
No.
He's really Samuel Langhorne Clemens, born in 1835 and died in 1910. Okay. He cares very deeply about the truth, doesn't he? He cares very deeply about the truth. How widely familiar and prominent in his experience has truth-telling been? Not much. Not much. Most people are liars. And at very best, they are stretchers of the truth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right from the outset, we know a great deal about the moral expectations of this speaker, don't we? And so then we are not surprised 108 pages later when he says, all right, then I'll go to hell. What will send him to hell? Protecting his companion, Jim, the runaway slave who shares the raft with him. We're not surprised by that if we remember his introduction of himself to us. This work of genius by Samuel Langhorne Clemens. Read the Bible every year. Read Huckleberry Finn at least every 5 years. All right, now that we've caught on to this method, let's play it again. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. Who's the speaker? Can't hear you.
Well, it doesn't say, but it's right in front.
You're sure?
I'm sure.
You're sure?
It sounds like
Well, I just know because he could be writing about somebody else.
Ah, yes. That's it. Okay. Or it's not on the horse. He's not on the horse.
The man owns the horse.
He's not on the horse. He's in a sleigh. All right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. What's the audience? Who's the audience? He is in fact talking to himself, yeah, but broader than that?
Reader.
Almost any reader, I guess. It would probably help if you'd had some northeastern climate experience with snow. That would be probably a better intended audience. What's the tone toward this audience? Whether it's himself or those of us who have wandered out at night on a snowy evening.
Tired.
You think he's tired? Hmm?
All they can think about is sleep.
I think he's determined.
Beauty of a moment. Beauty of a moment.
Yeah.
Beauty of the snow.
The beauty of nature. He's an admirer of his own environment at that particular moment. Right? What about all of this business about trespassing?
It sounds like he has some need to justify or explain himself.
All right. He knows he's on somebody else's property, and he's actually pausing long enough to appreciate his setting. You think he's serious about the legality of this? Do you think he's worried about being ordered off the land? All right. Here's a question for you. Why does he repeat himself in the 15th and 16th lines? I've had a student say, because he ran out of ideas. All right? All right? Why does he repeat himself? Why did I pause in my recitation of the poem after the 15th line and then give you the 16th line?
So you know it's going to start back. Emphasis.
Wait.
He's going to start back on his travel.
Okay.
He's concerned.
He's got a mission of sorts. Determination. Yeah, he's going to do. Promise.
Let me ask you this. How do the miles in line 15 and the miles in line 16 differ?
Punctuation.
I know it's Saturday morning, but please don't be dull. Downtown is the magnificent mile. What makes it magnificent? The level of the boutique stores and the cost to enter them and walk out with your funds intact, right? Okay. On Long Island, we have the Miracle Mile, same thing, okay? Are we talking about 1,760 yards? Are we talking about 5,280 feet? Are we talking about 63,360 inches? In line 15 we are. What are we talking about in line 16? The journey. What journey? Life. Okay. Yes, sir.
If we were to act this out in line 15, it's like he's reflecting on, oh, I got miles to go.
Yeah.
But what I envision is
Checking his watch and
he's
looking.
in the sled and he says, and miles, he cracks the whip and gets something moving.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Let's go on. We went to church 5 times a week, 3 times on Sunday. I wasn't allowed to play ball on Sundays. We were force-fed a lot of doctrine. The 2 main beliefs were in the total depravity of man and the divine grace of God. I only believe in one of them now. My father became very religious, so that even prayers at the table and the school were not enough. We had to end the day by kneeling on the kitchen floor with our elbows on the chairs. My mother never sang in church again after my sister died. Who's speaking? A son with how many in the family? Well, there were at least 4. There used to be at least 4. Yeah. What's the moral environment he's being raised in? Can't hear you. Legalistic. Okay. Legalistic what? What religion? Calvinists. How do you know that? Total depravity and grace. Okay. Which one does he still believe in? Not the grace. That's evident. Okay. The language tells us the answer to all these questions. The author, the famous short story writer and novelist named Peter de Vries. Peter de Vries is from Chicago, brought up in the Christian Reformed Church, attended Christian Reformed schools, graduated from Calvin, now Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The last time he was invited as an alumnus to speak, he appeared so drunk on the platform that he had to be helped staggering to the lectern, and he leaned on the lectern for, I'm told by people who were present, for several minutes, just leaned on the lectern and looked out at the audience of students and faculty and said, "You people are all too damned happy." And he walked away. Peter de Vries has written a powerful novel called The Blood of the Lamb. It's about a father whose daughter is dying, and the hospital is religiously affiliated, and there is a chapel, and he goes into the chapel to pray to the crucifix for mercy. And on her birthday, he comes with a cake for the patient daughter and finds that she's already died. And he returns to the chapel. And he throws the cake in the face of the crucifix. And then something happens which I won't tell you. But read the novel, The Blood of the Lamb. This is from Peter de Vries' own autobiography. Let's try another one. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." "However," replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation." We have here how many speakers? Wrong. How many speakers? 3. We have the narrator. We have the man. We have the universe. What's the tone of each speaker? You see how much fun this game is? Yeah. It brings the literature to life. These are real voices that we can hear.
Defiance.
Defiance on the part of
The man.
the man and the universe in return. Yeah. So what, says the universe. All right. Which gives us the attitude of the principal speaker, the narrator, the attitude toward what? Everything. Everything. It's a nihilistic world we inhabit. This is Stephen Crane, the Red Badge of Courage. His father, the Methodist Bishop of New Jersey. He spent his summers at Ocean Grove Bible Conference. But at age 12, he announced that he had given up on hell and the rest of the sideshows. He died at 29, cursing God. But we know all that by reading his poem. The same principle that we've been playing with here applies to your students' composition. If one of them is assigned in primary, middle school, to write a book report, we're asking that student, that pre-adolescent, to tell us about something she has read and enjoyed and wants others to find the same pleasure. And she's encouraged to write in that voice. It doesn't need to be as formal as the term paper her older brother is writing in an 11th grade assignment, or perhaps as chatty as their mother's email report to the book club, or as scholarly as their teacher's intended doctoral dissertation, or in the voice of someone else who's writing a book review for the Chicago Tribune. Each of these writers, each of these tasks assumes a different speaker and a different intended audience. What about your own writing? Let's assume that you've decided that next year is your final year because either you'll be leaving your present school or retiring altogether. How will you begin 3 different written messages? One to your immediate supervisor, announcing your intention. One to your best friend on the faculty, and one to your own family. I see my time is moving so fast, I was going to say turn the page over and try a sentence of each of these 3, but instead of that, I'll show you what might be the case. This is to the supervisor. It is with deep regret that I inform you of my intention to resign my position at the close of the next academic year. Respectful and formal, correct? As you're well aware, I've been increasingly frustrated by our principal's lack of vision, so today I did something about it. That's to my friends on the faculty, right? Well, I did it. I finally got up the nerve and told the jerk in the office I've had enough. Now, why doesn't that go to the number 1? Huh? Huh? All right. Okay. How can an English teacher utilize the skills and experience of an author or a literary critic simply by acting out those roles in your own classroom? Ask yourself or your students, if I'd been writing this story or this poem or this play, How might I have changed the plot or the last two lines of that poem or the way the character expresses himself? How might those changes have improved this original work? And here are a few quickly summarized recommendations for your consideration. The best teaching environment is not the typical classroom with rows of school desks, but a table at which the seated teacher joins the students in dialogue and learning from each other. It's borrowed from Socrates in his grove of trees called the Academy. And it's a common mode in the British schools and universities where a Cambridge or Oxford Don tutors 2 or 3 students at a time in his rooms in college. In the USA, the method of collaborative learning is generally known as the Harkness Plan, originated in 1930 at Phillips Exeter Academy, a magnificent story in itself, and adopted by many schools throughout the world. It's organic, it's spontaneous, it's dynamic, it's unlikely to be duplicated in the following hour, and that makes it at one and the same time the most scary and yet the most rewarding method of teaching. Another principle that I urge upon you is in-class writing. When it comes to teaching students how to write, I begin at least one class, and often more than one per week, with 15 minutes of writing. I give up that much time for something other than the sound of my own voice. Each student has a special notebook in which to write a continuous narrative or address some timely topic that I might suggest. Only 3 conditions. First, each student must write, not read or complete homework for some other class. Second, whatever they wrote remained ungraded, unread by me, unless in private they chose to show me. And third, I wrote myself each day, and productively enough that I can show you passages in published books that actually began as a writing exercise in my own class. For younger students or reluctant writers, I recommend imitative composition exercises. Give each student a copy of a paragraph from something, the newspaper or a magazine, interesting if possible. Ask them to copy word for word what's in that text, and then turn the page over and retell that same content in their own language and gradually developing style. And as students gain confidence, shift from copying the content to reading and then writing on that content, or deliberately writing an opposing argument to that content, or change the sentence structure, or begin a whole series of questions of their own about that content. Because fine poetry and serious prose are precious gems, they deserve to be treasured, meaning memorized, then recited in public. As I told the Educators Summit in Phoenix in December, I once had a student who objected to my assignment, saying, "Why do I have to memorize this stuff?" To which I replied, "Your parents have commissioned me to be the interior decorator of your soul." and I am hanging beautiful tapestries on the walls of your memory. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. At her lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a rose, and the incarnation was complete. Jay Gatsby's first kiss with Daisy Faye Buchanan. The Great Gatsby. My wife loves to hear me recite that. But we must insist not only on the memorization of literature, but in every academic discipline. Each has its own principles to be learned, retained in memory, and applied. The Pythagorean theorem, Newton's laws of motion, or Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier hypothesis in American history. So in every academic discipline, the process of moving from any latent idea to an early formulated thought, to initial conflicting theories, to resolved proposition or solution must be clarified in words that make sense. Similarly, in every academic classroom, a teacher rightly asks, "What's your supporting evidence for your response?" And by default, the duty for teaching students how to express themselves with a precise vocabulary and sound reason has been assigned to us, the English teachers. Our colleagues expect us to prepare students to thrive in any academic setting by expressing themselves with clarity of thought and speech, questioning premises and received opinion en route to developing their own appreciation for truth and a worldview that reflects that standard. But in all fairness, our colleagues in other disciplines and their expectations ought to result in shared responsibility. Language skills and careful reasoning ought to be assessed. There is no battle of Gettisberg, because there's no place called Gettysburg spelled that way, okay? So do history the decency of spelling the name of the village correctly. Rewarded or penalized in other classrooms, just not always in the English teacher's habitation. And finally, how does a teacher acquire enough respect by students to comment favorably or unfavorably on somebody else's work? Sufficient to critique by praise or requiring editing and revision? My answer is by experience, example, and encouragement. Like the experienced literary critic, the teacher must also know the broad field of the art or science and exercise a discriminating difference between taste and opinion. Taste varies and cannot be judged as right or wrong. It's expressed in this Latin maxim, de gustibus non est disputandum, meaning there's no quarrel over whether roast beef and potatoes are better than spaghetti and meatballs. They're just different. It's all a matter of taste. But in order for one's opinion to be valid and have influence, it must be grounded in fact, interpreted reasonably by experience, and considered by comparison and with humility. Time is the best judge of enduring quality. Like the rankings of pop culture, the current top hits on Spotify, or the Academy Awards, or the bestseller list, these are mere fads, subject to decay and a forgetful public. The classics have won their status by long-lasting recognition for quality. For instance, the motion picture Casablanca has earned its place in cinematic art simply by outlasting more than a few other films. And I remind you that the greatest of all bestsellers carries this dust jacket endorsement. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. Teaching how to think rather than what to think. It'll be the hallmark of every Turning Point Academy school. Our task is not simply to quarantine our students by hiding them away from any infection of error. Instead, our task is to inoculate and nurture our students with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, beginning with the fear of the Lord. Only so will they discover for themselves the blessings of truth, beauty, and goodness, and so prepare them to encounter and overcome the ravages of falsity, ugliness, and evil. And I pause before leaving the stage with thanking you. I pause to ask you to endure the pain and the anger of viewing some of last night's behavior outside Chavez Ravine Dodger Baseball Stadium. And I'm going to be very candid and blunt and tell for some of you who didn't or won't or can't. A man suspended on a cross was approached by yet another man who climbed the cross and did a gymnastic switch so that he was himself hanging from the top of the cross with his head in the crotch of the crucified. If you don't believe it, look it up. This is where our nation is headed, and we must do something quite unlike our passive Protestant practice. That's not in the speech. Thank you.